All right, everybody. Hope you're doing well. Welcome to a Fix Your Gut live stream. I am your host, John Brisson, the editor-in-chief of www.fixyourgut.com. Go there for all your gut health needs, health research, coaching. If you're dealing with silent reflux or SIBO or bloating or fatigue or brain fog, contact me for coaching. Or if you're dealing with, decreased mitochondrial function, which can be caused from frequent non-native EMF exposure, like we're going to discuss on this stream. And usually it manifests itself as diabetes or fatigue or brain fog or joint inflammation or muscle weakness, heart disease. There is a good website and YouTuber that I recommend. Now, granted, I don't agree with Scotty on everything. However, I do enjoy watching his videos about non-native EMF exposure from a electrical engineer point of view. So I do like watching his videos, and I want to thank him for putting me on to today's study, which I am going to read for you guys and discuss it. Today's study comes from Professor John Frank, the lead research and evidence-based medicine module at the University of Edinburgh. And Professor John Frank, Director of Knowledge Exchange and Research Impact, Usher Institute, University of Edinburgh, is a physician epidemiologist with 44 years of primary care public health practice, research, teaching, and consulting in 4 countries. He has led 3 new startup nonprofit institute centers for applied public health research in Canada and Scotland since 1991. His special area of expertise is health inequalities by socioeconomic status, a topic clear relevance to policy options being considered by many COVID-19 affected nations as they seek exit various forms of lockdown without worsening population health or inequalities. So yes, I mean, he is an established professor with a long-term history. He's not just, some guy, making a paper about concerns of 5G. From BMJ Journals, the Journal of Epidemiology and Community Health. Electromagnetic Fields, 5G and Health. What about the Precautionary Principle by John William Frank? 5G, fifth generation technology, is being widely promoted by politicians, government officials, and private sector interests. They contend that its advent will bring clear economic and lifestyle benefits through massive increases in wireless and mobile connectivity at home, work, school, and in the community. Examples of these 5G benefits include driverless vehicles and the Internet of Things, automated and continuous communication between the machines and our daily lives. On the other hand, the public health response to this wave of communications innovation has become a sense of deep concern, related to widespread scientific uncertainties as well as the lack of use of existing evidence. In the current international safety guidelines for 5G and related radio frequency electromagnetic field RF EMF exposures, this commentary sets out the reasons for such concern. What is 5G and why is it different from past EMF exposures? Developed over just the last decade, radio frequency wireless transmission systems in the 5G category are being rolled out throughout the world. These systems will massively increase the volume, speed, and spatial reach of digital data transfer. The 4 successful previous generations, 1G, 2G, 3G, and 4G, of wireless transmission systems were developed initially for wireless and mobile phones in the 1980s and 1990s, followed by Wi-Fi in 2000s, and then smart meters and the Internet of Things in 2010s. Each successful generation of transmission systems has used higher frequencies of electromagnetic waves to carry ever larger volumes of data, faster and more ubiquitous locations. 5G is widely acknowledged to be a step change in this sequence, since it additionally uses much higher frequency, 3 to 300 gigahertz radio waves than in the past. 5G will also make use of very new and thus relatively unevaluated in terms of safety, supported technology including pulsing, beaming, phased arrays, and massive input, massive output, MIMO, see below, to enable this higher data transmission capacity. However, unlike prior generations of wireless transmission systems, 5G ultra-high frequency waves are easily interrupted by vegetation foliage, and building walls often require additional signal boosting within each building. This inherent fragility of 5G high-frequency waves means the transmission-boosting cell antenna are generally required every 100 to 300 meters or less, far more spatially dense than the miles-apart transmission mass required for older 2G, 3G, and 4G technology using lower frequency waves. This dense transmission network is also required in order to achieve the everywhere, anytime connectivity promised by 5G developers and necessitated by new technologies such as driverless cars, which must not be out of internet contact for safety reasons. Critics of 5G agree, but its supporters do not, that the overall population levels of exposure to RF EMFs will be greatly increased by the 5G generation rollout. One compelling argument for the view is the inverse square law of EMF exposure. Intensity varies as the inverse of the square of the distance from the emitting source. With plans afoot internationally to put a 5G booster antenna on every second or third lamppost, it's difficult to believe that overall population exposures will not increase substantially. Existing 4G systems can service up to 4,000 radio frequency using devices per square kilometer. 5G systems will connect to 1 million devices per square kilometer, greatly increasing the speed of data transfer by a factor of 10 and the volume of data transmitted by a factor of 1,000. International health protection agencies and their scientific advisory bodies have published several reviews over the last decade of varying scientific quality of the research evidence required potentially adverse biological and health effects of RF EMFs. These reviews by Health Protection England, the International Agency for Research on Cancer, IARC, an expert European Union committee, and the International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection, ICNIRP, have, with one exception, not converged around a strong warning about such effects. IARC is the outlier in this respect, having determined in 2011 that EMFs are possibly carcinogenic to humans. Meanwhile, independent radiation and health scientists have published serious concerns about the current rollout of 5G transmission systems. The reasoning is twofold. One, these systems have an unprecedented potential to create human and non-human RF EMF exposures orders of magnitude more intense, e.g. in terms of power flux density, than was the case only a few decades ago. Two, there is a remarkable dearth of evidence in the safety of 5G-specific EMF emissions, but a growing body of research suggestion of the harms from other RF EMF exposures which have been studied for much longer. Yes, it's a compound effect. I feel bad for people who live in major cities because there will be so many 5G antennas and boosters. They're just going to be everywhere, and they're going to expose people to greater concentration of non-native EMF than previously beforehand. Moreover, a growing number of engineers, scientists, and doctors internationally have been calling on governments to raise their safety standards for RF EMF emission, more and better research, and hold off for further increases in public exposure pending clearer evidence of safety. Some politicians have listened. France, Israel, Cyprus, and Russia have banned Wi-Fi in preschool and restricted its use in primary schools. It's good. Belgium has banned the sale of mobile phones to children under 7. It's also good. In response to such concerns, several jurisdictions have recently blocked the installation of 5G antenna systems in their communities. Brussels, Florence, Rome, as well as Glastonbury, Frome, and Totnes in the UK, and widespread anti-5G campaigns are now emerging in Australia, North America, and elsewhere. Some countries have lowered allowable RF EMF exposure levels before those permitted in the UK and US. PowerWatch, a non-profit independent organization in the UK, has published comparisons of international recommendations on permitted maximum exposure levels to EMFs. Those comparisons show the highest permitted RF EMF exposures, which are used globally as the basis for national safety guidelines, are those used in the US, the UK, and most of the European Union. Those exposure limits are derived from the international recommendations to the World Health Organization in 1998, recently updated but essentially not changed in March 2020 by the ICNIRP. These international comparisons show the safety limit for RF EMF exposure set by the ICNIRP tenfold higher than the set by the next most liberal guidelines found in Israel and India, and 100 or more fold higher than the limits set by other guidelines, spanning 14 EU jurisdictions as well as China, as discussed in the detail below. One reason that IC and IRP's permitted exposures are so high is that they're based solely on the acute thermogenic heat-producing effects of RF EMF in animal tissues. This is like more conservative jurisdiction guidelines, which are based on wider variety of biological and health effects documented in recent decades, including effects resulting from chronic rather than acute exposures and effects not mediated by thermogenesis. So the more we're exposed, the more damage it may do to our mitochondria. Key contentious issues and scientific uncertainties. Lack of clarity about precisely what sort of EMS will result from 5G rollout. A striking feature of this public controversy is the various commentators, even though with advanced training in telecommunications, physics, and engineering, inconsistently refer to quite different specific technologies when they discuss the pros and cons of 5G. American authors tend to state that the 5G system rollouts already underneath in that part of the world are using very high frequency, 24 to 100 gigahertz shortwave RF transmission, so-called millimeter range waves. However, some UK European Union industry websites state that no new frequencies are required at present beyond those already in use in existing 4G mobile networks, Wi-Fi smart meters. However, independent authors commenting on current private sector plans in the European Union to extend 5G networks more widely in the future tell a different story. These commentaries imply the use of millimeter wave frequencies about which we have very few conclusive studies of human health effects. It is already planned and inevitable in the European Union and eventually globally in order to accommodate anticipated consumer requirements, especially the quote-unquote Internet of Things and driverless vehicles. Tellingly, The Guardian, one of the United Kingdom's most respected newspapers, reported last year that United Kingdom lampposts were becoming the subject of expensive legal battles over, quote-unquote, who can charge what for mounting 5G booster cell antenna on them. Cash-strapped local councils had hoped to profit from such charges to telecom companies. These companies have taken local governments to court to block these charges. The United States of America provides a cautionary tale in this respect. Nearly 25 years ago, national legislation there took local authorities completely out of the telecommunications regulatory system, leaving local 5G installation and similar decisions entirely in the hands of central authorities, that is, the Federal Communications Commission, or the FCC. Wow, okay. Equally inconsistently described in the writings about 5G is a complex set of special signal modulations, pulses, polarization, phased arrays, and novel equipment designs, for example, massive MIMO antennas, which represent the cutting-edge technologies that accompany 5G system installation, many of them proprietary. As some commentators on potential health effects from such exposures have pointed out, it is highly likely that each of these many forms of transmission causes somewhat different biological effects, making sound, comprehensive, and up-to-date research on those effects virtually impossible. Wow, okay. In short, 5G systems is not a consistently defined term. This confusion has not helped clarify the health and safety issues surrounding 5G rollouts internationally. An emerging preponderance of laboratory studies, including RF EMF's disruptive biological effects, with many knowledge gaps. The lack of consistent definition of 5G matters enormously. That is clearly demonstrated in a sophisticated recent review of the laboratory science evidence of RF EMF effects in diverse biological systems. This review shows that existing scientific literature on the biological effects of more recent developed technology is quite limited, and that there's hardly any study replication, the hallmark of reliable research. Yep, the scientific method, replication of studies. We often have one exact study of any given biological effect of a specified combination of radio frequencies, modulation, and pulse patterns. The literature that does exist identifies remarkably heterogeneous biological effects across hundreds of such specific RF EMF exposure patterns. Furthermore, a comprehensive Canadian review of the same evidence states that some of the new RF EMF technologies, such as innovations in radio frequency, pulsing, polarization, and modulation, are so new that biological scientists have not been able to keep up. That is, no studies yet exist of those new technology biological effects. These recent reviews of laboratory, i.e. non-epidemiological studies of the biological effects of RF EMFs, do identify diverse multi-system effects operating by a range of physiochemical pathways which are not mediated by thermogenesis. The reviewers' document is a growing body of evidence that RF EMF exposures produce effects spanning reproductive, teratogenic, oncological, neuropsychiatric, skin, eye, and immunological body systems. Okay. In addition, there are many fundamental effects at the subcellular level in terms of oxidation, DNA alteration, gene expression, and bacterial antibiotic resistance. That's true, and also damage to our mitochondria, which are the powerhouse of our cells as well. Particularly striking is a 2008 study from Israel documenting the capacity of the sweat ducts in human skin to act as quote-unquote helical antennae, receptive to 5G frequencies of RF EMF. When sweat ducts are exposed to these RF EMFs, there are remote systemic effects to the skin's established capacity to secrete and send hormones and other signals to the entire body. This report alters one's sense of the potential risks from such high-frequency waves, since they have long been thought to be inherently less dangerous because they are largely absorbed in the top few millimeters of exposed tissue, thus limiting any adverse effects in theory to the skin or eye. Yeah, remember, the skin is your body's largest organ. It is an organ within your body. Finally, it is instructive to look at the two widely called NIH toxicological studies of specific EMF's effects on thousands of rodents, conducted by experienced and highly respected laboratory scientists at the world's leading institution. Since their publication in 2018, epidemiologists and other scientists have pointed out several methodological weaknesses in the conduct and analysis of these studies that make their unequivocal interpretation almost impossible, particularly in terms of relevance to human health, excessive statistical interference, testing of multiple over 1,000 hypotheses, without appropriate adjustment of p-values considered quote-unquote statistically significant, reporting of results quote-unquote often ignoring statistical tests, failure to explain major internal inconsistencies of findings across EMF doses, tumor types, and rodent sexes. Wow, they even list the different sexes of the rodents. And use of experimental EMF exposures far in excess of any known human ones, uncontrolled confounding by direct thermogenesis effects. The list goes on. So the studies are flawed. In short, laboratory studies of EMF exposure are fraught with both internal and external validity issues and cannot replace high-quality human epidemiological studies, though we will now discuss these are also hard to come by. Lack of conclusive human epidemiological studies of 5G health effects, but increasing epidemiological evidence of serious health effects from previous generations of RF EMF exposures. Canada's most senior cancer epidemiologist, Miller et al., have last year summarized the human epidemiological evidence linking human breast cancer and brain tumors, male reproductive outcomes, and child neurodevelopment conditions to RF EMF exposures resulting from the use of past generations of transmission systems. Critically, this evidence is not about exposure to high radio frequency, short-wave 5G systems. These systems are too newly deployed to have been extensively studied, especially by the highest quality epidemiological study designs. For establishing evidence of causation, prospective cohort studies. Such studies typically require decades of follow-up to detect delayed health effects such as most cancer. That's true. Miller et al. Find compelling evidence of carcinogenesis, especially in the brain and acoustic nerve, as well as the breast from strong RF EMF exposures to previous generations of mobile phone transmissions. Perhaps the most convincing evidence they cite comes from the oldest and most often maligned study design, case reports. While admittedly old-fashioned case reports can, when they involve pathogenomic effects, i.e. pathological features absolutely specific to a particular exposure, provide useful evidence of exposure outcome specificity, a valuable but often unattainable epidemiological criterion for inferring causation according to the standard epidemiological criteria first enunciated by Sir Austin Bradfield Hill over 50 years ago. Strikingly localized breast tumors of unusual morphology have been diagnosed in several women with particularly strong exposure to previous generations of mobile phones. They habitually place their phones in their bra or on the same side of the body where the tumor has developed. Yeah, women, ladies, you don't want to do that. Men, you also, if you are, anybody I recommend, there's an EMF blocking phone case that I have called Safe Sleeve, and the front of it does have EMF blocking metal material that I've tested with EMF meters, and it does block it, which I find very critical to have something like the Safe Sleeve, so that if you put your phone in your pocket as a male or a female, that the radiation isn't going directly into your leg, or, if you're male, your testicles are right there, and there have been studies of non-native EMF exposure reducing sperm production and sperm counts. So yeah, you want to make sure that your cell phone is on airplane mode as much as possible, that you turn off unnecessary features when you're not using them, like Bluetooth or GPS or mobile data or Wi-Fi. You want to have as little broadcasting services on your phone at use at all possible, to reduce your non-native EMF exposure. I have a cell phone, don't get me wrong. I do use one. However, I do my best to try to limit my exposure to the non-native EMF as much as possible by doing those things. You can also use an air tube headset instead of a standard headset where the speakers are separated from the earbuds or the earphones themselves, and you have an air tube up to the earbuds or headphones themselves, that carries the sound instead of the speakers being exactly where the headphones or the earbuds are. So yes, I definitely would recommend getting air tube headset too as well. I would recommend getting some sort of radiation protection cover like Safe Sleep for your phone, and I also recommend you turn off certain capabilities of your phone like Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, mobile data, and GPS when you're not using them, because it will increase the specific absorption radiation, the SAR, the amount of radiation that your phone projects out by doing those things. If you have your Bluetooth on, your GPS on, your Wi-Fi on, your mobile hotspot on, and your mobile data on all at the same time, your phone will broadcast more non-native EMF, more radiation. So those are some helpful tips. They predict that such an update now would rate RF EMFs at the minimum probable, not merely possible, as in 2011 carcinogens, based on evidence. Also, Miller et al. Call for an urgent update of the 2011 review for EMFs and cancer by the International Agency of Research on Cancer, based on the information. Persistent allegations of unscientific basis for existing health protection guidelines on RF EMFs and unmanaged conflicts of interest on expert advisory panels. A senior epidemiologist from Sweden, Hardel, has repeatedly published in peer-reviewed journals detailed allegations regarding the main World Health Organization scientific advisory body on EMF health effects and safety. They previously mentioned ICNIRP. Hardel contends that ICNIRP's membership includes overrepresentation of vested interests, including the giant multinational telecommunication firms who are heavily invested in the rollout of 5G systems internationally. ICNIRP has long been influential in EMF regulation. Its scientific recommendations to the World Health Organization were first issued in 1998, updated in 2009, and revised and updated again in March 2020. Hardel points that the ICNIRP's pro-industry bias may explain its continued reliance only on studies of the thermogenic heat-producing effect of RF EMF in biological tissues. These studies would be expected to paint an overly benign picture of RF EMF safety. Yeah, because it may not necessarily heat up or produce heat from the skin itself when you're exposed to non-native EMF, even though I've shown studies where it does. But that doesn't mean it doesn't create increased oxidative stress in the cells separate from the thermogenic effect, or reduction of the mitochondrial electron transport chain, harming mitochondrial health by increased reactive oxygen species and reactive nitrogen species production. So there's a lot to this that isn't being reported. And a lot has to do with, big telecommunications, for lack of a better word. All right. Now, where was I? The narrow ICNIRP focus flies in the face of published reviews by independent scientists citing compelling research evidence accumulating steady over the last few decades of non-thermogenic adverse effects of RF EMFs affecting diverse human and animal subcellular function, tissues, and organ systems. In detailed, almost lawyer-like publications, Hardel fastidiously documents the ICNIRP's 20 years of dogged defiance In the face of widespread criticism by other scientists, this is a scientific base for the recommendations remains dated and narrow, rendering their guidelines on quote-unquote safe RF EMF exposure unsafe. The most damning evidence adduced by Hardell is a table of the cross appointments held by 6 members of the World Health Organization monograph group across 5 major international advisory panels on the health effects of non-ionizing radiation. Hardell also describes these scientists' strong personal links to the telecommunications industry, a situation likely arising from the fact that the ICNIRP itself is a quote-unquote private organization, non-government organization, or NGO based in Germany. New expert members can only be elected by members of the ICNIRP. Hardell contrasts the ICNIRP's reports to the publication of the quote-unquote Bio-Initiative 2012 group of nearly 30 international experts in the field whose operations are not only wholly independent of such vested interests, but also entirely transparent. The current version, March 2020, of the Bio-Initiative 2012 website provides detailed descriptions of 988 peer-reviewed scientific studies of adverse potential health biological effects of EMFs arising from RF and similar non-ionizing sources. The vast majority, 84.6% of these 988 studies, document disruptive biological effects from such EMFs, almost all of them operated via non-thermogenic pathways. This writer would have preferred to see more quote-unquote critical appraisal of the quality of the studies than the Bio-Initiative 2012 website provides. However, the major effort entailing and assembling this massive body of scientific evidence and updating it regularly since 2012 is impressive. Finally, Carpenter has recently published a well-researched analysis of how source of funding correlates with study findings across many peer-reviewed publications over the last few decades of the relationship between various kinds of EMF exposure and several cancers. He shows convincingly that studies funded by private sector entities with strong vested interest in maintaining their current use of sources of EMFs under study tend to find no association, whereas studies funded by public sector independent sources find the opposite. Of course they would. I mean, there's so much money involved in big telecom, isn't there? And all the regulatory investigative bodies within the corrupt World Health Organization, among others, they're full of people on telecommunication boards. So what do you expect? The studies produced by big telecom are going to be flawed and are going to be difficult to replicate, which is the basis of any true science. Is the scientific method of replication of previous studies to get similar or same results. It's ridiculous. Finally, Carpenter has published a well-researched analysis of how source of funding correlates with study findings. He knows convincingly the studies funded by the private sector entities with strong vested interest in maintaining their current use of sources of EMFs under study tend to find no association, where studies funded by public sector independent sources find the opposite. As Carter points out, that suggests that many systematic reviews and meta-analysis in this field, having failed to correct for this source of funding bias, quote-unquote, likely underestimated the evidence for causation. Conclusions and recommendation. In accessing causal evidence in the environmental epidemiology, Bradford Hill himself pointed out that the whole picture matters. He argued against prioritizing any subset of his famous 9 criteria for causation. One's overall assessment of the likelihood that an exposure causes a health condition should take into account a wide variety of evidence, including biological plausibility. After revealing the evidence cited above, the writer, an experienced physician epidemiologist, is convinced the RF EMFs may well have serious human health effects, while there is also an increased scientific evidence for RF EMF effects of ecological concern in other species. Both plants and animals, these have not been reviewed here for reasons of space and the author's disciplinary limitations. In addition, there is a convincing evidence cited above that several nations' regulatory apparatus for telecommunications innovations such as the 5G rollout is not fit for purpose. Indeed, significant elements in those apparatus appears to have been captured by vested interests. Every society, public health, especially the health of those most likely to be susceptible and hazard and question in case of EMFs, children, and pregnant women, needs to be protected by evidence-based regulations free from significant biases. Finally, this commentary would be remiss if it did not mention a widely circulating conspiracy theory suggesting that 5G and related EMF exposure somehow contributed to the creation or spread of the current COVID-19 pandemic. There are knowledgeable commentators' reports on the web debunking this theory, and no respectable scientist or publication has backed it. Indeed, combating it is widely viewed by the scientific community as critical to dealing with the pandemic. As conspiracy theorists hold this view, have already carried out violent attacks on mobile phone transmission facilities and other symbolic targets, distracting the public and authorities at a time when pandemic control actions are paramount. This writer completely supports the view of broader scientific community that the theory of 5Gs and related EMFs have contributed to the pandemic is baseless. Okay. That's the only part of this whole thing that I disagree with this man on. It's not the singular cause. 5G isn't. However, this whole paper talks about the health effects, negative health effects of 5G and non-native EMF exposure. Therefore, if you don't, and even talks about it affecting one's immune system. So the author is flawed here in his own bias. That, and maybe his own counter-signaling. Could just be counter-signaling, it is all it is. But to think that 5G and non-native EMF does not have effect on one's immune system and make you more susceptible to diseases, and the more susceptible to, worsening effects of diseases or worsening effects of the spread of disease, is incorrect. It's very incorrect. It even states in this paper itself that non-native EMF has effect on a person's immune system. So I'm disappointed in that final paragraph. It follows that for the current 5G rollout, there's a sound basis for invoking the quote-unquote precautionary principle. This is an environmental and occupational health principle by which significant doubt about the safety of new and potentially widespread human exposure should be a reason to call a moratorium on that exposure, pending adequate scientific investigation of its suspected adverse health effects. In short, one should err on the side of caution in the case of 5G transmission systems. There is no compelling public health or safety rationale for the rapid deployment. The mass gains being promised are either economic for some parties only, not necessarily for widely distributed financial benefits across the population, or related to increased consumer convenience. Until we know more about what we're getting into from a health and ecological point of view, these punitive gains need to wait. I agree. Besides the next to last paragraph saying that non-native EMF exposure would have no effect on a person's immune system as far as the COVID-19 infectious disease, that's kind of counter intuitive to what he mentioned above, citing sources that it does affect one's immune system. But other than that, a very important paper by John William Frank, the University of Edinburgh. Yes, I am concerned about 5G, non-native EMF exposure, just as I'm concerned about 4G or 3G or 2G or 1G or, the use of Wi-Fi. I do think it does have health issues for many people. Not for all. There seems some people who have very high mitochondrial function that they're able to offset some of the damage done by non-native EMF. I'm not a fear monger when it comes to increasing non-native EMF radiation. I don't think there's going to be a human extinction level event caused by it. However, will it make more people ill, and will it cause more health problems? Well, yeah, that's likely. I think we have enough evidence of that to be the case. All right, everybody, take care. Hope you guys enjoyed the stream. If you want more information about what can be done to reduce your non-native EMF exposure, my book, Fix Your Mitochondria, my second book, will be out this year and has a whole section discussing non-native EMF and its effects on the human health in our body and our microbiome and what can be done to mitigate some of it. I also have a blog coming out soon on Fix Your Gut about the non-native EMF and its effects on the microbiome. You can always also contact me for coaching. I know how to make your exposure to non-native EMF less. We're all exposed to some of it unless we live in the radio-free dead zone and have no non-native EMF producing electronics in our households, in the United States. But it's about reducing your exposure as much as you possibly can and by bolstering your mitochondrial function and health to protect you against the oxidative stress that exposure to non-native EMF can cause. And in doing so, many people can hopefully even overcome non-native EMF sensitivity. Not always, but some people can. Or you can build your resilience to non-native EMF exposure. But all right, everybody,